Welcome everyone to this month's leadership training. Today I'll be walking through the book The Ideal Team Player by Patrick Lencioni. This book identifies 3 virtues that make up an ideal team player, how these virtues work together for the betterment of the organization, and what we can do to help develop these virtues both in ourselves and in each other, but also in the students that we're leading. So to begin, I'm going to walk through the 3 virtues of an ideal team player. So instead of looking for people with virtues, most employers look for people who are competent and have technical skills. However, Lencioni describes somebody he calls the ideal team player, and that person pretty much is somebody who encompasses these 3 virtues that he thinks are necessary for good teamwork and to be able to help with the organization as much as possible. So these virtues are, first one is humility. So a great team leader lacks excessive ego or concerns about their own status. And leaders with humility share the credit. They emphasize the entire team over themselves, and they define success collectively over individually. So people who might struggle with humility show it in kind of 2 different ways. The first way is pretty obvious. It's over-arrogance. So these people might make everything about themselves, and this can end up fostering a lot of resentment, division, and politics. But kind of on the flip side of that is somebody who lacks humility might lack a lot of self-confidence, and this can be easily mistaken as humility, but a lack of self-worth is a violation of humility. Even C.S. Lewis says, humility isn't thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. And so people who have a lack of self-confidence end up hurting the team by not advocating for themselves and their own ideas. So a lack of humility comes from insecurity, and it leads to the overprojection of talents or the discounting of their own talents. So the next virtue that Patrick talks about is hunger. So hungry people always look for more because they're self-motivated and diligent. So hunger can be directed in a selfish way, which means they're really, really devoted to what they're doing, but only for themselves and not for the team. Or it can be taken to an extreme where work prioritizes over everything, leading to burnout. Healthy hunger is a manageable, sustainable commitment to doing a job well and going above and beyond only when necessary. And then the last virtue that Patrick talks about is people smarts. So being smart in this context means being acutely aware of the people around and how they might react to certain situations. So smart people will ask really good questions, listen to what other people are saying, and be very intently engaged in conversations that they have with other people. And smart people can use their skills with others both for good and for bad intentions, since they have an innate sense of how people will respond. So now that we have a good idea of what these 3 virtues are that make up an ideal team leader, we're going to move into how these virtues kind of interact with each other, which I personally find is really interesting. I'm a really big kind of Myers-Briggs, DISC personality, all the different personality types I'm a really big advocate for. And this is another kind of, the way that Patrick describes it is kind of similar in that, where he kind of categorizes different people based on what virtues they have and what virtues they don't have. So the ideal team player model is it's just as important to understand these 3 virtues, but we also need to understand how they work together and how lacking in even just one can detrimentally hurt the team. So somebody who doesn't have any of the virtues is a 0 for 3, and they can end up causing a lot of hurt to a team. And however, they're often easily identified in interviews, in different work environments, and they are very rarely accepted into a work environment. And so with this thought, I have a question for you guys. So as leaders, who are in ministry, we are in the people business, you could say. And there's a pretty good chance that we can come across students who are not very proficient in any of these three virtues. And I'm just wondering, because Patrick in his book doesn't really talk about how we handle people who don't have any of these virtues. It almost seems like he kind of dismisses them. But obviously there's still a reality and these people still exist. So I was wondering, I was just going to open it up for a little bit of discussion. So what are some practical ways that we can teach and develop these students in these three virtues so that they can be the best that they can be? We'll take a little break for discussion. Okay, that's great. Good job, team. There's 5 minutes. All right. So moving on past somebody who doesn't have any of these virtues, we're going to talk about people who only have one of them. And so someone proficient in only one of the three virtues has a very steep upward battle to fight in order to learn the other, in order to learn all three of them, but they're still more teachable than those who don't have any of the three virtues. So the first person is what Patrick calls the pawn, and that person is someone who is solely proficient in the virtue of humility. And this person, because they don't have any of the other virtues, they can usually be left out of conversations, and are just kind of like pushed to the side a little bit, but they're usually, because of their humility, they're pretty easy to work with. And they only do what they're supposed to do and nothing more, because they don't have the hunger and the drive to do more than that. And then pawns will more often excel in work environments that rely more on harmony than in production. But obviously in the majority of businesses, it's not just, all right, let's work together. Normally we're working together to produce something. So that's where they might suffer. Moving on to the next one, Patrick calls this person the bulldozer. And that is somebody who is solely proficient in the virtue of hunger. And this person is very determined to get things done with little focus on other people or the team as a whole. They can be really quick destroyers of teams, but easily stand out to leaders who value teamwork and can receive quick correction or removal. And bulldozers will more often excel in work environments that value productivity. And they can often go uncorrected for a really long time in these kinds of environments because they go, but it can be really easy in environments of productivity to kind of dismiss how this person is treating other people, because that's not the point of the business or the organization. And then the last person for the one out of the three virtues is the charmer. And this person is someone who is solely proficient in people smarts. So this person is often really instantly likable and easy to be around. However, they don't have a lot of drive to get things done, and they don't really have a lot of humility either. So this person, even though they're really likable and people seem to enjoy being around them initially, and they can kind of charm their way into different situations, they might survive a lot longer than the bulldozers or the pawns because of their charisma, but they're eventually will be found out because of their negligible work ethic. All right, so moving on to people who have 2 out of the 3 different virtues. So these people with 2 out of the 3 virtues can be a lot harder to find out than those with only 1, because oftentimes their strengths will often outshine their weaknesses. Still, these people have the best opportunity, obviously, for overcoming these weaknesses and becoming ideal team players. So the first one that Patrick talks about is the accidental mess maker. And this is somebody who is proficient in only humility and hunger. Now, this person genuinely wants to work hard and for the right reasons. They have really good intentions, and they want to see the business or the organization do better and be better. However, they might be unaware of how their words and some of their actions can be negatively affecting the entire team as a whole. So their colleagues might have really genuine respect for these kinds of people, but might end up having a lot of built up frustration and bitterness for consistently cleaning up the mess that this person often might leave behind. And then accidental mess makers often have really good intentions and a desire to be better. So because of that, they'll often take correction really easily, but they just need someone to be honest with them and upfront with them in their work. All right, so the next person in the 2 out of 3 category is the lovable slacker. And this is somebody who is proficient in only humility and people smarts. Well, so this person has a tendency to work well with other people and really care about those around them. But he might not have the best output for the team's goals because they have really limited passion for the mission and what they're doing. So these people really have a tendency to kind of do as they're expected, not much more, but because of their charm and their charisma, they're often overlooked, and because they're just so lovable, what can go wrong? But the lovable slacker needs a lot of oversight and encouragement from their leaders so they don't bring down the rest of the team due to their lack of productivity. And the last one that Patrick talks about in the 2 out of 3 category is the skillful politician. So somebody who is really proficient in only hunger and people smarts. And these people are very cleverly ambitious and they're willing to work extremely hard, but only in as much as it will benefit them personally. And these people can be really hard to work with because, again, they're really charming and they seem to kind of have it all together. They know what they're doing. They know what the mission is. They know what the goal is. And they're really excited and really want to keep going. And so these people kind of might, because of their charisma, might seem like they're being humble. However, they're not, and they're really only in it for themselves and what they want and to develop their status and their reputation. And this can cause a lot of difficulty for leaders to notice the destructive behaviors that this person might be leaving behind. And skillful politicians often have a tendency to rise up in leadership where productivity is valued over teamwork, because the more you pour out, the more tangible results there are. It might not seem to matter in certain situations how well the team is working as a whole. And then something to note before moving on to the 3 out of 3, which is the ideal team player, is that labeling somebody a certain way should be done with a lot of thought and a lot of care, because labeling somebody the wrong way can be really destructive because they might feel one way about themselves, but if someone puts a label on them, then what they feel about themselves, all of a sudden their identity can become misconstrued, and they might be seeking to become something that they already aren't, and that can cause a lot of inner conflict. And then also, these classifications are really reserved for people who have a very significant lacking in one or more of these traits. Not just a little bit, not just like, okay, I'm really good in these 2 areas, and I'm kind of like, I'm not as good in this area, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I am not an ideal team player. If I am like significantly lacking in one area, then that might mean that I'm fall into one or more of these categories. And then moving on to the 3 out of 3. So the ideal team player possesses adequate measures of humility, hunger, and people smarts. The ideal team players work with a sense of energy, passion, and personal responsibility, and really want to see the company or organization grow in every single way possible, including the team. And now for the final piece of our training, I'm going to walk through how we can apply all of these areas to our lives and the work that we do inside of our youth group. So, the application. So there are 4 primary applications that Patrick talks about. The first one is hiring. Next is assessing current employees. The third one is developing employees. And the first one is embedding the model into the organization's culture. Well, for the sake of this training, I'm going to skip over the hiring information, but I do encourage you to read the book and understand this section for yourself. So moving on to assessing current employees. This often will lead to 3 different outcomes. The first one is confirmation of the employees excelling in all 3 of these virtues. That's great. They're an ideal team player. The second one is, well, we're now able to recognize what areas this person needs improvement, so now we can help this employee improve themselves and be even better than they are. And then the third thing that might end up happening is recognizing the need to remove this employee and seeing that they don't necessarily fit in whatever the situation is, and they don't want to change or improve themselves. And something to note is that these assessments are not for punishment or to put people down, but it's for vulnerability and the ability to find improvement in the process. So something I'm going to have everyone discuss is I want everybody to think about all these 3 virtues: humility, hunger, and people smarts. And I want you to rank yourself on where you think or how you think you accomplish each of these virtues. Like 1, 2, 3, I do this one the best, this one second, and this one I might need some more work on compared to the other 2. And then we're going to go around and we're going to share these rankings and a few statements as to why we all rank them in this order. So that way we can get a better sense of each other. And we can find out ways that we can help each other, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit when we talk about developing employees. So to start out this discussion, I'll explain a little bit about myself first. If I were to rank myself in these 3 areas, I would definitely say that my number 1 is probably people smarts. I have a really good internal sense of how other people kind of function and how they might fit into certain situations. And I try to be as aware of as possible of the words that I say and how that might affect the people around me. And then secondly, I would say probably humility. I definitely would rank this one lower just because there are times when I do suffer with a lot of lack of self-confidence and don't really speak up as much as I probably should. And the third one I would say is obviously hunger, because there are definitely times where if I forget about what the mission is, I can become very unsatisfied and struggle with my own personal motivation to be able to keep going, and to understand how I can better help in our goals and what we're doing. We're going to have everybody go around. Talk. La, la, la. All right, we all know each other better. That's great. So now we're going to move into developing employees. And this is information that I myself, as your guys' leader, I'm going to try and use this information to help you guys, but I also encourage all of you to use this information to help your students become even better people than they are now. So an important factor to seeing development happen is for the leader to be consistently reminding the employees to do better. And the outcome of this is that after consistent remindings, this employee is going to break through and finally find the self-motivation to not continue hearing these consistent reminders and want to, fulfill these needs themselves. Something else that might end up happening is that the employee is going to decide for themselves that they don't want these virtues, and this isn't something that they feel like they can fit into or buy into, and on their own, because of these consistent reminders, they decide to leave. And then what might end up happening after really consistent reminders is that this employee will only tolerate these reminders and not do anything to change their behaviors, which could end up leading to termination. So ideal team players need development just as much as people who aren't necessarily an ideal team player just yet. And the best way that we can do that is by challenging other leaders to encourage each other and coach each other in areas of excellence. So first of all, we're going to talk about how to develop humility. And humility, Patrick talks about in his book pretty often. He says that humility is the most important virtue because it really affects the other two and how we continue to process these things. And apart from that, humility really is drawn from how we view ourselves. So to help somebody identify humility, the first thing we need to do is identify the root cause of their insecurities. So to identify the general cause of their insecurity by looking at their childhood experiences, maybe relationships they had with their parents, or even using personality types to see where their specific personality might struggle in areas of insecurity. And then after that, after figuring out what the root causes of their insecurities, something we can do, obviously, because we're not licensed psychologists or licensed therapists, something that we can help them do is what Patrick calls exposure therapy. And that's simply to encourage them to force themselves to be humble by actively, for example, encouraging other people, giving compliments, or admitting their mistakes. And with that, actively doing things that are humble, maybe without necessarily getting there themselves just yet, they can find the freedom that humility brings and desire to do that themselves. And then something that Patrick describes over and over and over again when he talks about developing these different virtues is the most important thing and the best thing that we can do as leaders is to lead by example in ourselves and in the ways that we interact with other people, and showing that we're not perfect and we do make mistakes, and that's the best way that other people can learn is by us leading by example. So no matter what virtue that somebody might struggle with, whether it is humility or it's hunger or their people smarts, the best thing that this person can learn from is the way that we exemplify and embody these virtues ourselves. So moving on to how we develop hunger. Now, Patrick kind of explains that hunger is the hardest thing to develop because it's not really a matter of merely increasing output. It's more about internal transformation and the desire to do and be better. So sometimes people who lack hunger may want to stay that way because it's an easier lifestyle to live. And somebody with a lot of motivation and drive can hear that and feel like, what? What does that mean? How do you not want the motivation to do something? But in reality, I guess you could equate it to being lazy or not really wanting to be a part of something. It's a lot easier just to sit back and not really give anything to this organization and just kind of go with the flow instead of being passionate, being motivated, and making sure we're always doing better. Living a lifestyle without passion and hunger is really a lot easier than living a lifestyle with hunger. And so Patrick describes this as like the other two scenarios, or the other two virtues, humility and people smarts. Those are things that, for the most part, people want to have. But hunger is something that a lot of people might not necessarily want to have, and so it's not something we can really teach. It's something that they need to be able to transform inside themselves and find their passion and find their hunger for what they love. So if that is the case, maybe it's time for that person to leave their current work environment and find one that doesn't really need as much hunger, whether that's, I don't know, just doing mundane tasks, checking things off the list, things that don't necessarily need a lot of drive to be better and drive to work harder. So when we are developing people who don't have hunger but want it, something that's really important for them to know is the reason why they're doing what they're doing. And that might sound really simple, but it's honestly really true, because if you don't have a passion and you don't, for the things that you're doing, you're not going to want to do it anymore. And something that we can really teach and remind these people who want more hunger is just to remind them every single day, hey, this is why we're doing what we're doing. And for people like us who are working in the church, the reason why we are doing what we're doing is for the cause of Christ. And it's to see these students grow in their relationship with Jesus and be better than who they are now. And I know that because of different situations and different circumstances, it can be really easy to become discouraged and not necessarily want to do more or to be better. And that's why we need to be consistently reminded of the end goal. And the end goal is that there are lives at stake. there's people's eternities at stake, and we have a crucial part to play in that because of the call that Christ has given to us. And then on top of that, in order to see somebody excel in the virtue of hunger, they really need to have clear expectations for what it is that you want them to do. Because if they don't know what you want them to do, then they're not going to do it. And they don't know the higher expectations that you have. They're only going to meet you right here, which is the bare minimum. When you want them up here, but you don't tell them you want them up here, they're going to keep going down here. So by being clear and concise with what you want from your employee, they're going to have an easier time transforming their desire, because it's also hard to have a desire when you don't know what the expectations are. And then something that we can be doing to helping people develop hunger and a desire for what they're doing is to be continuously encouraging them. And so consistent encouragement is necessary for the person to want to keep doing what they are doing. Again, consistently reminding them, consistently encouraging them that there's a purpose for what they're doing. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and obviously that light is the kingdom of God. And what better thing to do, and what better reason to have to do something than to further the kingdom of God. Now that we've talked about hunger quite a bit, we're going to move into developing the last virtue, which is people smarts. So again, anybody who lacks in this area likely wants to do better, and they have good intentions. So it's really, really, really important when you're dealing with people who don't necessarily have very good people smarts, to remind the people around them that this person has good intentions. They're not seeking to hurt. They're not seeking to do harm or anything. They want to see the group excel. They just don't know how to do it sometimes. So it's really, really important to make sure that the other people around know and understand this, because if you're on the receiving end of somebody who doesn't necessarily understand people very well, it can come off as very hurtful and offensive. And we might have this innate desire to be defensive and not want to comply with whatever it is that they're doing, because we feel like we're being attacked when that's really not the case. So, and then with that, some basic training that we can do with this person who has people smarts. And this is really important to be very consistent about, and making sure you're keeping an eye on this person at all times. And what you do is you simply pull this person aside and you consistently remind them of the outcomes of their actions and how to recognize other people's responses. And this is something that you can't necessarily kind of like see once and brush it off because, oh, it's a little thing. Even the little things matter, because if they're not able to handle the little things very well, how are they going to be able to handle the big things? So now that we've talked about how we can develop these virtues within people, we're going to talk a little bit about how we can take these virtues and take this model and embed it into our organization's culture. So for me, as somebody who desires for these three virtues in my leaders, in myself, and in my students, we also need to have a desire for these virtues in the overall culture of the organization and how we do things. So how this works is the first thing we have to do is we have to be straight, we have to be explicit, and we have to be bold. And how can we expect other people to get on board with the things that we love and these virtues that we are pushing for if we don't share about them and we don't tell people about these virtues and these values and the reason why these things are so important to us? And then the next thing we need to do is to what Patrick calls catch and revere. And so one of the best ways that we can create a culture of an ideal team player is to recognize when people exemplify the virtues, and then we share that recognition with other people. So if somebody does something that's like, oh, they're complimenting somebody or they're encouraging somebody else and putting other people above them, and they're exemplifying the virtue of humility, we can see that and we can tell the people around them, look at this person, they're doing a great job. And it might be awkward, it might make people feel a little weird, but it leads into healthy competition to make other people want to do more, to make other people want to be better, to see these things and to recognize them and to encourage them. And then something else that's really important, kind of on the flip side of that, is when somebody does something that does not emphasize these three virtues. Let's say we see that they're only doing things for themselves, and they're being more selfish when it comes to their work and not sharing credit or not doing things that would benefit the team, only themselves. We need to be really quick to catch these things and correct this behavior and make it known that we really value these virtues. And if we see things aren't going the way that we want them to, that we're going to correct them immediately, because we can't just let things slide under the rug, because how can we develop a culture of this ideal team player if we don't see things that are wrong and do something about it? So in conclusion, I want to thank you, everybody, for listening and participating in our training, and I hope you took something away from it and are challenged to become an ideal team player. Thank you so much.